Is anybody really surprised that John Boehner has had it up to here, if you will, with conservative groups that are helping him lose House seats and lose leverage? You shouldn't be. We'll talk about that and so much more on this edition of Get Right with Lenny McAllister, starting right
now. Get Right with Lenny McAllister.
I've had it up to here with the likes of you people.
The way we help bring back America and we build the bridges and bring people together is by making sure we hold everybody accountable in a 360 fashion. So let me close with this. Yes, there is a change that we can believe in, but it will never come from a politician or a government program.
We cannot find physical sanity here in the land of Lincoln from Carbondale to Elgin, in which collectively continue to tolerate the insanity found on the streets of South Chicago and East Texas of Florida.
We got to move away from the American Idol soundbite nature of politics and back to the American statesman of humble servant leadership that we used to see in politics. It is time to roll out the era of the new, educated, engaged, and energized American citizen. I go do the jail ministry. I speak to the kids in the streets. So I'm never going to lay down being a conservative just as much as I'll never lay down being a proud African American.
I feel like a black republic. Money I got coming in. Can't turn my back on the hood. I got love.
Is anyone surprised? Is anybody surprised? Please tell me. First of all, you know what this is. It's Get Right with Lenny McAllister. You know the drill. You want to find me on Twitter. It's LennyMcAllister. If you want to find me on Facebook, you know the drill. It's tinyurl.com/Lenny Page. Let me get that out of the way right now. You know what that is. But you gotta admit, that is basically what John Boehner sounded like when talking about this budget deal. That's exactly what he has to be saying to Tea Party members of the Republican Party. And that, by the way, you all know the drill. I've spoken, you know the drill. You know what I'm going to say. You know that I'm going to tell you I've spoken at Tea Parties. You know I'm going to tell you that Tea Party people are not off the hook, shebang, just out the box nuts. They're not. You know, I actually had an opportunity to talk about this. Had a chance to talk about this. Once again, PCNC, Pittsburgh Cable News Channel, was on Pittsburgh Now with former lawmaker Mike DeWita on the left, me on the right, and host Chris Moore. I want to say thank you once again to the folks at PCNC for having me on. And by the way, you can go to the website, go to LennyMcAllister.com if you want to see the segments that we talked about, particularly about this budget deal. It's there. But you gotta admit, this has to be what John Boehner is saying to the Tea Party element. And on PCNC, you'll see on the segment. I said, listen, nobody was talking about the national debt. Nobody was talking about spending. Nobody talked about these issues at a high level until the Tea Party. Ron Paul and a bunch of Ron Paul followers, and that was it. And that was a small but dedicated group of individuals that grew, maybe not necessarily as Ron Paul followers, but definitely as fiscal conservatives that were open about their concerns. That grew with the Tea Party movement. So the Tea Party movement has value. Do not demonize the Tea Party movement and say they have no worth to the American political conversation. That is not a true statement. Have some people in the Tea Party done some wrong things? Yes. Have some Tea Party candidates taken the party off track, the Republican Party? Yes. Have some Tea Party members done some things that they will be remembered for a lot more than the message of fiscal conservatism? Yes. All of those things are true, and I'm not condoning any of those things. By the way, if you go check the record, you'll see that I will blast them when they do the Todd Aiken, rape thing, or the forcible rape, or women's bodies have a way of shutting these things down, or some of the other insane things that have been said by Tea Party elements. I'm not a witch, 2010. Sharon Angle basically losing a winnable race in Nevada. I mean, there are plenty of things that I've talked about with this. And even on PCNC, I said, listen, you could talk about fiscal spending and cut down the spending and get the deficit down, but not including unemployment benefits in this some way, shape, or form as a Republican is a bad move. Now, again, there are Republicans that'll say, hey, that's more spending. But to sit there and let this be on the Democrats in regards to extending unemployment benefits when we as Republicans have to make sure that people can get to a point in time of getting jobs and then getting careers in America again, that's wrong. And I said that too. Live television. Go check it out. It's on the website. But with that said, let's get back to the I've had it up the hill with the likes of you people that we heard at the beginning of the show. If you don't think that doesn't sound like John Boehner at these press conferences, then I don't know what you're listening to. You had to have got a chuckle out of him pushing back on these conservative groups. Not because those groups don't have worth, because they do. Heritage Foundation and other groups bring out a lot of good information. You may not agree with everything that they say. I don't agree with everything that they say. But the information that they research has value in the American political conversation. But he has a point. The speaker has a point. At some point in time, and I said this as well. I know I'm kind of previewing the interview. You got to go watch it. These are plenty of things that I've already said, and I'm glad to see somebody in Washington in leadership finally saying these things from the Republican establishment. You cannot turn around the spending problem in America. You cannot turn around the issue with the national debt all at once with one bill. And that is what the Tea Party did wrong as a caucus, specifically in the House of Representatives in 2011 and 2012, and then they wondered why they lost seats and they were targeted. You cannot we didn't get into this debt overnight. You cannot do this overnight. It's going to take legislative steps, one at a time. Get conservative Democrats to basically see the error of their ways and piecemeal them. You got to put the breadcrumbs down. You got to walk them off that path. This is Hansel and Gretel here, if you will. Walk them down the path, and yeah, maybe some people will say that's kind of ironic, Len, because we do see the Republicans as, proverbially speaking, the big bad wolf. That's not where I'm going with this. I don't think the Republicans are the big bad wolf. What I do think that collectively the Republican Party, particularly in the House of Representatives, what we're trying to do is make people understand that we're going to have to curb the spending. We're going to have to address the national debt. It's about national sovereignty. It's not just about the Chinese. It's about if you do not have the buoyancy as a nation from an economic standpoint, you cannot compete globally. You do not dictate the terms of what's going on globally when it comes to trade, when it comes to jobs, when it comes to innovation. And that is where America is at this point in time. Which is why our middle class is shrinking, which is why our working classes are not able to get ahead in this recession. Wall Street's doing fine. Everybody else is still slumping mightily. Therefore, if you're going to address the spending, you're going to address the budget issues, you have to do this piecemeal, a little bit at a time, to make sure that those classes get back into the fold while at the same time addressing the long-term issue. John Boehner's right. The Speaker of the House is correct. Paul Ryan's right on this. You got to find the common ground initially, then move forward from there. You can't simply just try to do it all at once. We saw this in 2011. What happened? The debt ceiling crisis. It got fumbled. President Obama was against the ropes in 2011. Was against the ropes in 2011. What ends up transpiring? Who ends up being the bad guy when the credit rating gets downgraded? It was kind of President Obama. It was, mostly speaking, the Tea Party Caucus. Momentum was lost. When it came to the debate at the end of 2012, after the presidential election, when we're talking about raising taxes, there was a point in time where the Democrats, again, were willing to give in to the Tea Party Caucus, give in to the Republicans, and we shot too far. We wanted too much all at once. And what ended up happening? What we had in our hands, because we grasped way too tightly, slipped right through our fingers like sand. Guess who got blamed for that? The Tea Party Caucus. Do you see where this is going? Even with the government shutdown, even with Obamacare, yes, they blame President Obama for the slip-ups with Obamacare, but then you also hear the argument that, well, the Republicans have been trying to make him fail since day one. Of course it wasn't going to work well. The Republicans aren't coming to clean hands with this conversation either, you know. They're not coming with clean hands. And that's not even fair, because the Republicans didn't have a chance to put one iota of their ideas into Obamacare, and they still get the blame for it. And by the way, anybody that sits there and says this was a Republican idea, it was Mitt Romney's plan, it was Mitt Romney's name that was attached to a Democratic plan in Massachusetts. Come on now, let's kick it and let's be real. Let's remember what was going on in Massachusetts before he ran for the presidency. Let's just put it out there. All that to say this: you gotta feel for Speaker Boehner just a little bit. And you gotta be glad, even if you're a Democrat, even if you're a moderate or an independent voter, you have to be happy that Speaker Boehner at least had the backbone and the guts and the willingness to finally speak aloud and address his concern with conservative groups pushing members too far, making them scared about primaries, and not legislating, not governing with a vision to make sure America was better, make sure the diversity of America was taken care of, make sure that different economic classes, different socioeconomic classes in America were feeling the healing. Because Wall Street's fine. The people that cut the big checks for these primary races and general election races, they're doing fine. The people that contribute $25 and that are willing to put out yard signs but may be unemployed for 9, 10, 11, 12 months at a time, those are the folks that need the majority in the House of Representatives to get it. Need the majority in the House of Representatives to not sit there and constantly look over their shoulders, especially if they're the fiscal hawks, especially if they're going to be the people that are going to address how we spend and how we spend wisely to get America back on track economically, which will get us back on track when it comes to education, which will get us back on track when it comes to employment, which will get us back on track when it comes to some of the insanity that's going on in our society. People are nervous, people are scared, and a lot of this boils back to the economy, not being able to provide for your basic needs. I'm so glad, and again, if you agree, disagree, you know where to find me on Twitter, know where to find me on Facebook. I'd love to get your feedback. You have to look at this and say, thank goodness that the Speaker of the House finally stood up and say, listen, conservative groups, we appreciate you, but come on, you didn't even hear all this, and you're already sending out emails. You're already sending out blasts via phones and text and Twitter and everything else saying oppose this, vote against this, oppose this, vote against this. Now we'll see what the vote looks like. But I guarantee you, even if it passes, you're going to hear a lot of Republicans grumbling, belly aching about this deal, without remembering that we didn't get into this situation automatically. We didn't get into this situation overnight, and we're not going to get out of this situation overnight. If you look at Reagan in the 80s with Tip O'Neill, it was a series of legislative maneuvers, back and forth, some cuts, some increases in taxes, some additional spending on military and things that Democrats wouldn't necessarily want, and other types of maneuvers that got us through the first Reagan term before we finally turned it around. We didn't turn it around right away under Reagan. It just didn't happen. You had pretty high unemployment the first year and a half, 2 years under Reagan. There was a reason why those midterm elections in 1982 didn't look so rosy for a Republican president that came in and swept an incumbent out of office during a recession, high unemployment, inflation, the Iranian hostage crisis, all these things that were going on. Within 2 years, Reagan was behind the 8 ball himself. Before things got to 1984, before he won 49 out of 50 states, before America started turning it around from an economic standpoint, even for the black middle class, even for the middle class that was struggling, even for conservative Democrats in places such as Pittsburgh, Toledo, Ohio, Cleveland, Youngstown, Ohio, Chicago, places along those lines, in the Midwest, the Rust Belt, Detroit, those areas where people were struggling because of the recession in the 70s that started having an opportunity to find a different type of job, find a different type of lifestyle, that they hadn't experienced in 5 to 10 years, some of them. So when you look at this, it behooves the Tea Party Caucus, and this is why I'm happy that the speaker did this. It's not a level of animus towards the Tea Party. I think that if anybody thinks that the Speaker of the House, a Republican, hates the Tea Party, he doesn't hate the Tea Party. I don't hate the Tea Party. Most Republicans don't hate the Tea Party. They want the Tea Party to get the long-term perspective on things other than we have to reduce the national debt. We get that long-term perspective. We really, really do. We get that long-term perspective. However, there are other things that have to come into play. You don't reduce the national debt and bake into the cake this chronic, permanent 7 to 9% unemployment rate. You don't bake into the cake this chronic, impermanent, low ratio of workers to employment. You can't do that and be the global leader from an economic standpoint and from a employment standpoint. It just doesn't work that way. So it has to be a balance, and because it has to be a balance, you have to do this step by step. And because you have to do this step by step, you're going to have to get Democrats involved that are going to pass it in the Senate, that are going to pass it into Congress, that President Obama is going to sign into law, so that you can piece them down the path. Every other time we put up a brick wall to President Obama, every other time as Republicans, we put up a brick wall to the Democrats. Whether it was under Nancy Pelosi's speakership or it's in the Senate where you still have Harry Reid running everything. Every time we just put up a stone brick wall and say, no, we're not going to do this. Guess what ends up happening? 1, things get worse for Americans, and 2, Republicans get blamed. They get blamed because we go for all or nothing. It's kind of like the home run hitter. If you swing as hard as you can and somebody throws you a curveball, a changeup, a screwball, and these are all relative and appropriate analogies, while you're at the plate, you strike out. And not only do you strike out, but ask somebody that plays baseball what happens when they swing super hard and don't hit the baseball. They pull a muscle. They get hurt. They get embarrassed. They corkscrew themselves into the ground. And again, screwing themselves into the ground is also an appropriate analogy with some of the things that have happened with the Republican Party over the last several elections. You get my point. Gotta love baseball even though it's December, right? You get my point. You can't do some of these things. You have to do it step by step. You have to prove to the American people that you can lead and govern for a long-term tenure. You have to prove that over this tenure, that you're willing to take different perspectives into consideration. You're willing to govern for different areas other than your highly gerrymandered, very safe congressional districts. The Democrats didn't do that. That's not how Obamacare got passed. You now have people scrambling in 2014 that are at risk because of how Obamacare was passed by people that are in safe districts. Nancy Pelosi, California. Harry Reid, who should have been vulnerable but wasn't in 2010. Republicans, and I think Speaker Boehner gets it. You have to do something a lot differently than what the Democrats did when they had the majority in the House, the majority in the Senate, and control of the White House. And I think that is what Speaker Boehner finally articulated. I think this is what people were looking for in 2011, by the way. I think people expected Speaker Boehner to say this in 2011 in a way that he just wouldn't. Why? I think, in part, and I say this on PCNC as well, he was capitulating to the presidential election of 2012. He was trying to be a good soldier and not divide the base. That Republican nominee, whoever that was going to end up being, because remember, in 2011, we know who that was. Rick Perry. No, it's going to be Rick Santorum. Even actually, it wasn't Rick Santorum or John Huntsman that got any kind of endorsement at that point in time or won anything. We thought it was Rick Perry or maybe Newt Gingrich or Michelle Bachmann or possibly even 999 Herman Cain. And maybe Mitt Romney because he has the money, but, he's not doing well with these debates and he's kind of, he's not no flash, some substance, but he's not really impressing anybody on these stages. And in December 2 years ago, we were talking about the, $10,000 bet. People were unemployed, high unemployment. He's sticking his hand out. Bet you $10,000, whatever it was. So We didn't know. But either way, Boehner did not want to fractionalize that much further than it already was. Because you got to admit, and I'll say this before I let you go, you got to admit that the conservative base is already a two-headed entity. I will not call it a monster, although some of you might, but I won't. It's definitely a two-headed entity right now. And I think the speaker, for as long as he possibly could, much to his own angst, much to his own discomfort, etc., tried his very best, not to have the conversation or the sentiment expressed that he did this week on this budget deal. But I think that maybe, just maybe, Republicans everywhere, and maybe many conservatives, whether they want to admit it or not, everywhere, were finally glad to just see and hear a sentiment of, hey, knock it off for a second. Work with us. Let's do this in a long-term fashion. Let's make us great for 90 years, not just in 2014. And I got to admit, whether it's extremism on the right or extremism on the left, it's refreshing to hear somebody say, let's do this long-term in a successful and prosperous way for many people, not just for some people. It's my take on this. What is yours? You know where to find me on Twitter, LennyMcAllister. You know where to find me on Facebook. I will catch up with you Friday, and as you well know, you know where to find me, www.lennymcallister.com. Check out the clips from PCNC's Pittsburgh Now. Let me know what you think. Love to talk to you soon. In the meanwhile, I'll catch up to you. TCNGB. Take care and God bless.